The bulletin read, in the clean, dispassionate language of county paperwork, of a male subject approximately 70 years of age, gray-bearded, medium build, last associated with a reported property damage complaint filed against a Persimmon Crossing address, subject considered non-compliant with prior notice. It said nothing about a booth by the window. It said nothing about a dog curled by the counter with his chin on his paws. The stillness of 8 retired years settled into him like dust into a floorboard. It said nothing about a coat with a coffee stain, the shape of Ohio on the left cuff. It was simply read, once, under the deputy's breath, checked against a name he'd copied that morning, onto a printed run sheet folded twice in his breast pocket, before he ever looked up to see who he was reading it about. Per the bulletin, Deputy Preston Kingsley said, setting his palm flat on the table's edge, "You match a description on file. I need you to stand up for me, sir." Willard Ledbetter did not stand up right away. He set his fork down first, tines against the rim of the plate, the small courtesy of a man who does not like leaving a mess for someone else to clear. He looked at the young deputy's face, the way he might look at weather coming across a field, not afraid of it, just interested in which direction it would break. "You sure you've got the right description?" Willard said. It was not a question so much as an offer, made once, gently, the way a man hands another man a rope before he's asked for it. "Per the bulletin, sir, I need you to stand." The cuffs came out of a belt pouch with a small, businesslike sound, metal finding metal, and the diner's Tuesday morning hum, forks, a radio turned low, the fry cook's spatula scraping the flat top, thinned out and went strange, the way a room does when it realizes, without being told, that it is watching something it will talk about later. Somebody's coffee mug stopped halfway to somebody's mouth. A woman in a quilted vest put her hand over her son's arm without looking away from the booth. And by the counter, on a folded towel that had been his bed for 2 years, of Tuesdays, an 11-year-old Belgian Malinois named Anvil lifted his head. He had not lifted it for months, not for the bell over the door, not for bacon dropped and cursed over, not for anything faster than the particular, unhurried scrape of Willard's own boots crossing the linoleum. He lifted it now the way an old machine comes up to pressure, not fast, not eager, but total, his ears finding their working angle, his nose already testing the air 2 full seconds before his body caught up to the decision. Nobody in that diner understood yet what they were looking at. That would come later, in pieces, the way most true things do. Not delivered, but excavated. For now, there was only a young deputy reciting a paragraph of county language over a breakfast plate, an old man offering his wrists without being asked twice, and a dog everyone had quietly agreed to think of as finished, coming up off a folded towel, like a name being called, that he had waited 8 years to hear again. Notice that. Whatever else this morning turns out to be about, notice that. A single object a man has carried so long nobody thinks to ask about it anymore can still know more than every form in a filing cabinet. Keep that in your pocket. You'll want it back before this is over. The cuffs closed. Nobody moved to eat, and 40 feet away, in a back office with the door pulled to, a man named Marsh Kingsley, no kin to the deputy, a coincidence the town had stopped remarking on years ago, heard the sudden quiet through the wall, and reached, very slowly, for the lock. For 2 years running, every Tuesday, Willard Ledbetter had come into the Crossing Diner at 7 sharp, taken the same booth by the window, ordered the same 2 eggs over hard and the same dry wheat toast, and left, by 20 past 8, a dollar folded under the saucer that Dylan Crenshaw had stopped trying to talk him out of leaving. Dylan was 24, the diner's only cook most mornings, a boy. Willard still thought of him that way, though the word no longer quite fit, who had learned Willard's order the 2nd week and had never once needed to write it down since. He knew the old man took his coffee black until the cup was a third gone, then asked, without fail, for a little cream, as though the day had to prove itself worth sweetening first. He knew, too, that the dog came in with him and never once had to be told to lie down. Anvil folded himself onto the same square of floor by the end of the counter, nose toward the door, and did not so much sleep as idle, the way a good engine idles, present at a low hum, whether or not anyone remembered it was running. In 8 years since his retirement, Dylan had watched that dog rise for exactly nobody. Not the fry smell, not the bell, not the little girl from the feed store who'd once crouched down with a strip of bacon held out like a peace offering and gotten nothing but a slow, dignified blink for her trouble. Willard called it retirement plain, the way another man might say a tool was put away. He never called it done. After breakfast, without exception, Willard drove the 11 minutes out the county road to his sister's place, because every Tuesday at 9, Loretta Hollis had a standing clinic appointment in town that she was perfectly capable of driving herself to, and had said so, more than once, in the particular tone of a woman who has been told what she can and cannot manage since she was 17 and does not care to hear it from her own brother. Willard never argued the point. He simply arrived at 9, and she was always, by some arrangement neither of them spoke of, ready. He wore the same coat every Tuesday too, canvas gone, the soft gray-brown of a fence post, patched at one elbow with a scrap that did not quite match, clean as a coat can be kept by a man who mends his own clothes and expects them to outlast him. In the coat's left pocket, worn into the shape of it now, rode a folded rectangle of cracked leather, a harness panel no bigger than a paperback book, its brass rivet gone dull, and its edges filed smooth as a river stone. Dylan had seen him take it out exactly twice in 2 years, once to let Anvil put his nose to it before a 4th of July crowd made the dog restless, once for no reason Dylan could name at all, just a man standing at the register with the leather resting in his palm for the length of 3 breaths before it went back in the pocket. He'd asked, the first time, easy as passing the ketchup, what it was. Something of his, Willard had said, meaning the dog, and that had been the whole of it, and Dylan, who liked the old man too much to push where a man plainly did not want pushed, had let it lie. He never lifted that left arm past his own shoulder either. Dylan had noticed that early on, the particular economy in how Willard reached for the sugar or held the door, always working around some old ceiling built into the joint, never once complaining of it, never once explaining it. The dog moved carefully too, these days, in the specific arthritic caution of an animal whose knees remember more mileage than most trucks. Man and dog together made a kind of matched furniture in that diner, familiar past the point of being noticed, which was, Dylan would think much later, exactly how Willard Ledbetter seemed to prefer it. So when the bell over the door brought in a deputy that Tuesday morning, with a folded paper in his shirt pocket and a jaw set for something official, Dylan's first thought was not alarm. It was simple, mild confusion, the sense of a scene assembling itself in the wrong order, a stranger's certainty walking toward the one table in the room that had never needed anyone's certainty applied to it before. He wiped his hands on his apron and came around the counter, not yet understanding that the 2 years of Tuesdays he'd taken for granted were about to end, at least for one very long morning, in handcuffs. Per the bulletin, sir, description's a match. Gray beard, this build, this age range, last seen in connection with a property complaint filed against a local address. Deputy Kingsley said it a second time almost exactly as he'd said it the first, the way a man repeats a fact he has decided to trust more than his own eyes, and folded the paper back along its crease, as if that settled something. The complaint you're reading, Willard said, not raising his voice, was filed against a man who isn't me. I've lived in this county 40 years. I've never had a property complaint filed against me in my life. I understand you're saying that, sir. Kingsley did not look up from the clasp of the second cuff. But per the bulletin, I've got a description and a name flag, and I've got a procedure to follow, and the procedure doesn't ask me to take your word for it over dispatches. Dylan set down the coffee pot harder than he meant to. Preston, you know this man. He's been coming in here 2 years, every Tuesday, same booth. That's Willard. I know who he is to you, the deputy said, and there was no cruelty in it, only the flat patience of a young man reciting a rule he genuinely believed would hold him up if he leaned on it hard enough. Per the bulletin, that doesn't change the description match. I've got to bring him in and let it sort out downtown. That's how this works. Behind him, drawn out of the back hallway by the sudden hush, the way any owner is drawn to a room gone wrong, Marsh Kingsley came around the pass-through, wiping his hands on a rag that didn't need it. He was a broad, soft-shouldered man of 52 who had owned the diner 11 years and worn, in all that time, the particular smile of someone perpetually one step ahead of a bill he hoped nobody would ask about. "Whatever this is," Marsh said, pitching his voice for the room the way a man does when he wants witnesses on his side, without seeming to want them, "let's not make a circus of it, in my dining room. Folks are trying to eat." He did not look at Willard. He looked, for half a second too long, toward the hallway that led back to his office, and then away from it, quick, like a man checking a stove he'd already checked twice. "And that animal," Kingsley added, glancing down at Anvil, who had risen fully now and stood with his weight set low and even, watching the deputy's hands rather than his face. "That dog can't be loose in a food establishment during a detainment. Health code, liability, all of it. Somebody needs to get him out back or leashed off." "He doesn't need a leash," Willard said. "He's never needed one in this room. Per the bulletin's not the issue there, sir. That's just policy. Dog goes outside or in a vehicle during any detainment on premises." Kingsley said it like a man reading a second clause off the same page, comfortable now, warming into the shape of the morning. "Son," he said to Dillon, "can you walk him out back for me? He won't go with me." Dillon didn't move toward the dog. "He's never once come when I called him. He comes when Willard tells him to, and only then. Then Willard can tell him to." Kingsley said it reasonably, the way a man proposes an obvious solution to what he assumes is a simple problem. "He's in handcuffs," Dillon said. "You want him to give a dog a command with his hands behind his back?" Marsh cut in before Kingsley could answer, already moving toward the register as though the matter of the dog were somehow his to settle. "Just get him out of the dining room, Dillon, whatever it takes, before the health inspectors do through. We don't need a dog and a deputy, both making a scene in front of paying customers." There was no inspector due, not that morning, not that Dillon had ever heard of on a Tuesday, but Marsh said it the way he said most things, with just enough confidence that nobody thought to check it. Anvil did not move toward the hallway. He did not move toward Dillon either. He held his ground by the counter's end, ears up, head tracking not the argument in front of him, but something behind it, some current only he seemed to feel, moving through the building's back rooms, and for the length of several long seconds, nobody in that diner, not the deputy reciting his bulletin, not the owner rearranging his dining room, not the boy who'd fed that dog scraps for 2 years without once earning his trust, noticed that the animal wasn't confused at all. Willard noticed. Willard, wrists crossed behind him in a cheap steel bracelet that did not fit quite right over a coat cuff, thick with age, sat very still and watched his dog the way another man might watch a barometer he trusted more than the radio. He answered the questions put to him the way a man pays a toll, exact change, nothing extra. Asked his name, he gave it. Asked his address, he gave that too, plain and unhurried, the numbers the same ones that had been on his mailbox for 30 years. Asked whether he understood the charge being investigated, he said, "I understand what you think it is," and let the distinction sit there, unclaimed, offering no more of himself than the question required. He did not raise his voice. He did not, even once, try to explain to Deputy Kingsley who he had been before this county had known him only as the quiet man in the window booth. That was not, Willard had long ago decided, an argument won with words. He had spent 22 years learning that the only testimony that mattered came from something with 4 legs and no interest in being believed, and he was not about to start pleading his own case to a boy holding a folded sheet of paper like scripture. So he watched Anvil instead. The dog had settled into a posture Willard recognized the way another man recognizes his own handwriting, weight low and even across all 4 feet, head carried level rather than dropped, nose working not in the loose, curious sweep of an animal-smelling breakfast, but in short, deliberate pulls, aimed, testing, discarding, testing again. His ears had gone forward and locked. His tail, which for 8 years had done nothing more athletic than a slow, warm sweep at the sound of his own name, hung dead still. "He's not looking for bacon," Willard said, mostly to himself, mostly to no one, in the tone of a man confirming something he'd already half known the moment he heard the bell over the door. "Sir?" Kingsley had a hand under his elbow now, beginning the business of standing him up. "Nothing you need yet," Willard said. He let himself be brought up out of the booth, slow on the left side, the way he always rose from anything, compensating with the rest of his body, the way water finds the low ground, without anyone teaching it to. His eyes did not leave the dog. Anvil had turned, unhurried, deliberate, and taken 2 steps toward the back hallway, not fast, not frantic, nothing like the wild casting of a young dog working a fresh trail. It was the pace of an old professional pacing off a known distance, and Willard had seen that particular economy of motion exactly once before in his life, from this same animal, outside a compound wall a decade and a world away, in the half-second before Anvil had found something no one else in that column had known to look for. "He's reading something," Willard said, quiet, almost gentle, the way a man might name a weather change to someone who hadn't felt it yet. "That dog hasn't worked a scent pattern in 8 years. He's working one now." Nobody answered him. Marsh Kingsley, near the register, had gone very busy with a stack of receipts that did not need straightening and did not look toward the hallway at all, which was itself a kind of answer, if anyone in that room had thought yet to read it as one. They walked him toward the door the long way, past the restrooms and the narrow hall that led back to the office and the walk-in, because the front exit was blocked by 2 overturned chairs someone had knocked loose in the general commotion of standing up too fast, and Deputy Kingsley, a hand still light on Willard's arm, steered him that direction without a second thought, the way a man steers around furniture rather than through it. Anvil went with them. He had not been told to heel. Nobody had spoken a command to him at all since the cuffs went on, but he moved alongside Willard's leg the way he always had, close enough to brush the old man's knee, and when they came level with a plain door marked private, no different from a dozen such doors in a dozen such diners, the dog stopped. He did not slow down. He stopped, all at once, the way a machine stops when the current is cut, 4 feet planted, spine level, nose aimed at the seam where the door met its frame 2 inches above the strike plate. His head did not turn. His body did not turn. He held that line as though a rope ran from his nose to whatever was on the other side of that wood, and every fiber of him had gone taut along it. Deputy Kingsley, still moving, felt the leash of attention in the room shift before he understood why, and stopped too, more from instinct than decision, his hand still loosely on Willard's arm. "He's not confused," Willard said, and his voice, for the first time that morning, carried an edge of something other than patience, not anger, nothing so loud as anger, but the flat certainty of a man reading an instrument he built with his own hands. "That's a final response, feet set, head level, tail still, holding position without release. I taught that exact posture to working dogs for 2 decades. He's not sniffing breakfast through that door, Deputy. He's telling you there's something behind it he was trained to find." "Sir, I need you to keep moving. You need to look at your dog before you look at your bulletin," Willard said, and it was not loud. It was barely more than his ordinary register, but something in the flatness of it stopped Kingsley's feet, more surely than a shout would have. 8 years I've had him retired. 8 years he hasn't done this once. Not for food, not for strangers, not for the mailman's truck backfiring outside that window every single week. He is doing it now, at that door, and if you walk me past it without so much as writing down that he did, you are going to have thrown away the one piece of evidence in this building smarter than either one of us." The dining room had gone silent in the particular way of a crowd realizing, all at once and without being told, that it is no longer watching a small injustice, but the opening move of something larger. Forks stayed down. Even Marsh Kingsley, still at the register, had stopped pretending to count receipts and stood with both hands flat on the counter, watching the dog the way a man watches a fuse he cannot see the length of. Deputy Kingsley looked at the door. He looked at the dog, planted and unmoving, its stillness more unnerving in that dining room than any bark could have been. He looked, finally, at the old man beside him, cuffed, unbothered, standing on the ball of his good side with the patience of someone who had waited on far worse verdicts than this one. "Hold up," Kingsley said, to no one and everyone, his hand coming off Willard's arm. "Just hold up a second." And in that second, the procession stopped. Deputy Kingsley did not uncuff him. That much, at least, he seemed to understand he could not do on his own authority, whatever his eyes were telling him about the dog. Instead, he did the only thing his 6 months on the job had taught him to do when the ground shifted underneath a procedure. He reached for his radio, thumbed it, and asked, in the careful language of a man hoping the right answer would arrive from somewhere above his own judgment, whether a supervisor could clear a possible misidentification on scene. The answer that came back, thin and static, was not the one he wanted. The one supervisor on shift was 40 minutes out, on an accident on the county road, and nothing short of that supervisor's signature, or the sheriff's own, would release a subject once a bulletin match had been formally acted on. Kingsley looked at his watch, then at Willard, with the specific unease of a young man watching a clean, simple morning fold itself into something he had no training for. 40 minutes, Willard said, and it was not a complaint, only an accounting. My sister has a clinic appointment at 9. I drive her every Tuesday. 40 minutes puts me nowhere near her by 11:30, which is when that window closes for good and she will not reschedule, because she has already told the doctor's office twice that she does not need her brother driving her at all, which means if I am not there, she will drive herself, in that little car with the bad brakes she will not let me look at. Nobody in the diner laughed at that, though it had, buried in it, the dry shape of something that might have been funny on any other Tuesday. Deputy Kingsley only nodded slowly, filing it away with everything else that morning that would not sit still where his training had left room for it. Behind the counter, Marsh Kingsley had found his voice again, and it came out smoother now, rehearsed, the voice of a man used to being believed. "I don't want to add to anybody's trouble here," he said, moving out from behind the register with his rag still in hand. "But I've got a county health inspection scheduled for this morning, and I can't have the dining room full during that. Insurance reasons, you understand. I'd like to get folks clearing out, and I'd appreciate it if that door back there stayed shut till the inspector's through. There's product back there I don't need handled by anybody who isn't supposed to be in it." "There's no inspection on the book today," Dillon said. He hadn't meant to say it out loud, but it came out anyway, flat and a little startled at his own nerve. "I do the schedule, Marsh. I'd know." "You don't do the schedule for everything," Marsh said, an edge finding its way under the smoothness now. "Get that dog moved. I don't care how. Put him in your car if you have to. Dillon, I'm not asking twice." "I'm not putting him anywhere." Dillon planted himself between the counter and the hallway, without entirely deciding to. "He hasn't done anything but stand there." "You want him moved? You can call somebody who isn't me?" "Then maybe you don't need to be on my schedule either," Marsh said, quiet enough that it was meant only for Dillon, though half the room heard it anyway, in the stillness that had settled over the place. Dillon's jaw went tight, but he didn't move, and he didn't answer, and for a moment, the only sound in the diner was the low, steady breath of a retired dog, holding a line at a closed door, patient as a stone in a riverbed, waiting on a current only he could feel. Sheriff Reed Northcott came through the door 11 minutes later, called in not for a routine identification, as Kingsley had radioed for, but for what dispatch had flagged, with some confusion, as an unusual complication involving a canine alert on private property. He was 58, built like a man who had once been broader through the shoulders and had let time settle him without complaint, and he came into that dining room the way he came into most rooms, unhurried, taking a full measure of it before he spoke a word. His eyes went first to his deputy, then to the crowd gone quiet and watchful, then to the dog still holding its line at the office door. It was only on the fourth pass, coming back around, that his eyes settled on the old man standing cuffed near the counter, and there they stopped moving altogether. He did not ask Willard's name. He did not need to. What stopped him, what made a man 14 years a sheriff go stone still in front of his own deputy and half the county's breakfast crowd, was not the face, weathered and unhurried as it was, but the coat, and what the coat's owner had, without seeming to think about it, drawn halfway out of his own pocket the moment the dog's alert had held long enough to matter, a folded rectangle of cracked leather, a brass rivet gone dull, its tab filed smooth as a stone worn by 40 years of a river that had never once stopped moving. "Where did you get that?" Northcott said, and his voice did something Kingsley had never heard it do in 6 months of working under him. It came out low and unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with volume. "It's mine," Willard said. "Has been since before you were carrying a badge instead of a leash." Northcott did not answer that directly. Instead, he did something that made even Marsh Kingsley go still behind his counter. He crossed the dining room in 4 long strides, crouched, ignoring every eye in the place, and put 2 fingers against Anvil's shoulder, testing the set of the dog's weight, the way a man tests a load-bearing beam he already suspects is sound. Final response: feet planted, weight forward, tail locked, no release without command. Northcott said, reciting it the way a man recites something learned so long ago it has gone past memory into muscle. Word for word, the same phrasing Willard had used not 15 minutes before. "That's not standard department language. That's not how we train it now. That's how we trained it in '79, at Fort Campbell, under a training NCO, who used to say a dog's nose was the only sworn testimony in the room worth trusting." He looked up from the dog to the old man, and something in his face had gone the particular gray-white of a man doing arithmetic he does not want to finish. "I was 27 years old, Northcott said, slower now, each word laid down like a man setting stones across a creek he wasn't sure would hold his weight, in a joint exercise that went bad on a collapsed structure nobody had cleared for load. My handler partner didn't make it out in time. I was under 11 inches of beam and rebar for 6 minutes before anybody even knew which pile to start digging in, and the man who found the gap, who came in on his own authority against a direct order to wait for equipment, who pulled me out by main strength with a dislocated shoulder he never let anybody look at properly afterward. That man ended my K-9 career that same afternoon. Because the medics said I'd never trust my balance on a beam again, and he was right, and he never once let me thank him for it, because he shipped out on new orders 4 days later, and I never had an address to write to. He was still crouched by the dog. He had not stood back up. 31 years, Northcott said. I built a whole second life out of what was left of that morning. Badge, department, all of it. And I have told the story of the man who pulled me out 100 times to rookies in this department, and not once in 31 years did I think to wonder whether he was still alive to hear it. The dining room had gone so still that the radio behind the counter, turned low all morning, seemed suddenly loud. Marsh Kingsley had not moved from beside the register, and something in his stillness now had less to do with respect than with the particular stiffness of a man watching a floor he'd built on give the first small creak of a joist about to fail. "The description on that bulletin," Willard said quietly, into the hush Northcott had left behind him, "didn't come out of nowhere, Reed. Somebody's paper started this. Your dog just told you where to look for whose." Deputy Kingsley stood between the 2 older men with his cuff still on the old man's wrists, and his hand no longer resting anywhere near them, watching a piece of county procedure come apart in real time, and understanding, for the first time that morning, that the paperwork folded in his breast pocket had never once been the whole of the story. Northcott straightened up slowly, the way a man stands when his knees have opinions about it, and turned to his deputy with a voice that had gone from unsteady back to something flatter, harder, the voice of a man remembering, mid-sentence, that he was still wearing a badge. "Take those cuffs off him," Northcott said. "Now, not when the supervisor clears in from the accident. Now, on my authority, standing here." Kingsley's hands moved before his mouth caught up to a question, the key turning, the steel falling open, and Willard rolled his shoulders forward. Carefully, the left one no higher than his own collarbone. Old habit older than the badge on Northcott's chest, and said nothing at all about the relief of it, only reached down, once his hands were free, to rest one palm flat against Anvil's head, still fixed and trembling now with the effort of holding a posture his old body had not been asked to hold in 8 years. "Easy," Willard told the dog, low, the first word he'd spoken to him all morning. "You did your job. Stand down." Anvil's stance broke all at once, like a held breath finally let go, and he sat, hard, against Willard's leg, tongue out, sides heaving with an effort that had cost him more than anyone in that room, save the old man's hand on his head, would ever fully understand. "That bulletin," Northcott said, turning now toward the office door the dog had held so long, "didn't write itself, and it sure as anything didn't get its details from thin air. Somebody's name was in a file 3 years back that had no business generating today's mismatch, and I intend to find out whose." Marsh Kingsley, behind his counter, had gone the color of old dishwater and said nothing at all. Sheriff Northcott did not delegate the paperwork. That surprised his deputy more than anything else that morning, more than the dog, more than the sudden 31-year-old debt laid bare in front of a dining room full of witnesses, because in 6 months on the job, Kingsley had never once seen the sheriff personally fill out a correction form when a deputy could be handed the task instead. But Northcott sat down at the counter with Kingsley's own clipboard-free run sheet spread flat in front of him, borrowed a pen from Dillon, and wrote out, in his own hand, the notation that would follow the bulletin back through dispatch and into the county record. Subject misidentified, description mismatch traced to a fraudulent 2021 property claim, correction filed by Sheriff R. Northcott personally, effective immediate. "Some things," he said, not looking up from the page, "a man corrects with his own hand, or he doesn't trust that it got corrected at all." He looked toward the back office once, where 2 deputies who'd arrived behind him were already speaking with Marsh Kingsley, in low, careful tones about a claim filed 3 years prior against a handyman who had, as it turned out, left the county not long after being blamed for damage he had never caused, his description misfiled just closely enough to Willard's own, that a records clerk years later, cross-checking an unrelated active bulletin, had folded the 2 men into one on paper, without ever laying eyes on either. "Man never got to defend himself," Willard said quietly, watching the same doorway. "Filed and gone before anybody thought to ask him a second question." "He'll get asked now," Northcott said, "however late that is." It was Dillon, still standing near the register with his apron twisted in one fist, who finally asked the question the whole dining room had been circling since the cuffs came off, the one nobody had quite worked up the nerve to put to the old man directly in 2 years of Tuesday mornings. "That thing you carry," Dillon said, nodding toward the coat pocket where the harness panel had gone still and folded again. "Anvil hasn't worked a real job in 8 years, so what's it even for anymore?" Willard looked down at the dog leaning warm against his leg, at the graying muzzle, at the stiff hips that would ache worse than usual come evening for the effort spent holding that door. "It isn't for him to smell the world with anymore," Willard said. "He doesn't need it for that. Nose still works fine without any help from me." He rested his hand, once, light, on the dog's skull, between the ears, the way he'd done 10,000 mornings before this one. "I carry it so he's always got something of the job left to hold on to. Man retires, he still needs one thing in his hand most days that reminds him what he built his whole life around. Dog's no different, I just carry his for him, since he can't fit it in a pocket of his own." Nobody in that dining room said anything for a moment. It was not the kind of silence that needed filling. Deputy Preston Kingsley, standing off to one side with his printed run sheet still folded in his breast pocket, useless now against everything the morning had taught him, cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said plainly. No dressing on it. No attempt to explain himself into a better light. "I followed the sheet instead of looking at what was in front of me. That's on me, not the bulletin." Willard studied him for a moment, not unkindly, not with any of the satisfaction the boy might have braced for. "Bulletin's not wrong to trust," Willard said. "It's wrong to trust alone. Next time something doesn't sit right against a piece of paper, you ask the dog in the room before you ask the sheet. Dogs don't file false reports. People do." Kingsley nodded slowly, the words landing somewhere they'd stay. Northcott, still bent over his own correction form, allowed himself something close to a smile without ever quite looking up to let anyone see it plainly, and reached over to set one hand, briefly, on his deputy's shoulder, the small unspoken instruction of a man passing forward the same kind of correction he'd once been given himself, 31 years and a lifetime ago, by the man now sitting quiet in a diner booth, with a dog leaned hard against his leg. By the time the corrected bulletin went out through dispatch that afternoon, well ahead of the evening's reissue cycle, Marsh Kingsley's name had been added, not to a bulletin this time, but to a file marked for review by the county prosecutor's office. The old fraudulent claim reopened after 3 years of quiet dormancy. The handyman it had wrongly blamed to be tracked down and told, however late, that his name had finally been cleared of something he'd never known was following him. Dylan kept his job. Nobody in that diner ever heard Marsh raise his voice to him again. Willard did not stay to watch any of the paperwork finish. He had never been a man who needed to see the last page signed, to trust the pen was moving in the right direction, and besides, there was a clock in this for him too, older and plainer than any bulletin cycle, one that did not care in the slightest, whose fraud had just come undone. He walked out onto the diner's porch a little after 10, Anvil moving stiff and slow beside him, the effort of the morning settling into his hips, the way effort always did these days, and stopped there in the flat morning light to take the harness panel out of his coat pocket one more time. He held it a moment, the leather soft with age, the rivet dull, the tab worn smooth by 40 years of a man's own patient hand, making sure it would never catch on anything again. Then he folded it back along its old crease and returned it to its place, over his heart, where it had ridden through 2 years of Tuesdays and 33 years before that. Anvil leaned his head against Willard's knee and let out a long breath, the specific low sound of an old working animal setting down a weight nobody else in the world had known he was still carrying. Willard checked his watch. "Come on," he said, to the dog, to himself, to nobody in that whole quiet town who would ever fully know what either of them had spent a lifetime building. "We've got your Aunt Loretta to get to her appointment." He was, as he always was, on time. And somewhere behind him,